History loves a winner, but the ledger only respects the math. And in the 1960s, the United States military attempted to solve a geometry problem with high explosives. The equation seemed simple. Dropping 8 million tons of ordnance, more than the combined total of every theater in World War II, should result in 0 enemies left standing. We brought the most sophisticated killing machine in human history to Southeast Asia. We brought the F-4 Phantom, the B-52 Stratofortress, and enough napalm to turn the Iron Triangle into a glass parking lot. But while the Pentagon was busy calculating kill ratios and bomb tonnage, they missed the variable that would bankrupt the American moral and financial treasury. The enemy wasn't in front of us. They weren't even behind us. They were under us. While American taxpayers were spending $400,000 to kill a single enemy soldier, the Viet Cong were digging the grave of the U.S. war effort with hand spades and woven baskets. This is the story of how the world's greatest superpower was defeated by dirt, darkness, and a tunnel network that turned our own firepower into a joke. To understand why the Cu Chi tunnels exist, you have to understand the desperation of asymmetric warfare. You don't dig a city underground because you're winning. You dig it because the surface is a death sentence. The tunnels didn't start with the Americans. They began decades earlier, in the late 1940s, when the Vietnamese were fighting the French colonialists. Back then, they were simple hiding spots, badger holes to duck into when the Foreign Legion marched by. But when the Americans arrived with their helicopters and search and destroy doctrines, the Viet Cong realized that hiding wasn't enough. They needed to live, operate, and fight from a place where American technology couldn't reach. The Cu Chi district, located just 40 miles northwest of Saigon, became the strategic jugular of the war. It was the endpoint of the Ho Chi Minh Trail and the staging ground for attacks on the capital. The U.S. High Command looked at the map and saw a jungle to be cleared. The Viet Cong looked at the ground and saw a fortress. The soil in Cu Chi is lateritic clay, soft enough to dig through in the rainy season, but hard as concrete when it dries. It was the perfect medium for an architectural miracle born of pure survival instinct. On paper, the American strategy for the Iron Triangle was sound. It was built on the doctrine of attrition. General Westmoreland's logic was cold and industrial. If we kill them faster than they can be replaced, we win. The U.S. war machine was designed to dominate the X and Y axes, the surface and the air. The Pentagon sold Congress on a war of superior mobility. We had the helicopters to drop battalions anywhere, anytime. We had sensors to detect movement. We had defoliants to strip the jungle bare. The spec sheet for victory relied on the assumption that the enemy had to exist in our domain to fight us. Intelligence reports from 1965 estimated the Viet Cong's strength in the area at a few thousand, mostly poorly equipped guerrillas. The U.S. Army assumed they would be flushed out, engaged in a stand-up fight, and annihilated by superior firepower. They promised a quick cleanup operation. They promised that no force could withstand the technological shock and awe of the U.S. Air Force. They were selling a war of physics. They didn't realize they were entering a war of psychology. The illusion of control began to fracture almost immediately, but the brass refused to see it. It started with the ghosts. American patrols would secure a rice paddy, verify it was empty, and 5 minutes later take sniper fire from the center of the clearing. They would sweep a village, find nothing but old men and children, and that night the base camp would be mortared from the very village they had just cleared. The most disturbing reports came from the air raids. B-52 arc-light strikes would obliterate a grid square, turning the jungle into a moonscape. Infantry would move in to count the bodies, expecting a massacre. They found nothing. No bodies, no weapons, just churned earth and silence. Then the ground started fighting back. Soldiers walking on solid earth would suddenly disappear, swallowed by the jungle floor. It wasn't magic. It was the first encounter with the spider hole, the entryway to a subterranean nightmare that stretched for 150 miles. The U.S. Army had brought a sledgehammer to kill a colony of termites, and they were just beginning to realize that the house they were smashing was already hollow.
When U.S. Army engineers finally uncovered the extent of the network, they weren't looking at holes in the ground, they were looking at a civil engineering masterpiece built on a budget of $0. The design of the Cu Chi tunnels was a direct refutation of American air power. The system was dug in 3 distinct levels. Level 1, 3 meters down, captured the air and water. Level 2, 6 meters down, housed the living quarters, hospitals, and armories. Level 3, 12 meters deep, was the escape route to the Saigon River. But the brilliance wasn't in the depth, it was in the geometry. The tunnels were dug in zigzag patterns, rarely running straight for more than a few meters. This wasn't poor planning, it was blast mitigation. If a U.S. bomb managed to penetrate the earth, or if a GI threw a grenade down a hatch, the shockwave would dissipate against the tunnel walls rather than traveling down the corridor. They built U-bends filled with water to block tear gas and prevent flooding from the Mekong Delta rains. They engineered air vents disguised as termite mounds, scattered hundreds of meters from the main chambers. The U.S. Air Force was trying to suffocate a beast that breathed through thousands of invisible straws. It was a decentralized, redundant system that made the concept of a critical hit impossible. Because the bombs failed, the Pentagon decided to solve the problem with flesh. They couldn't collapse the tunnels, so they had to clear them. Enter the tunnel rats. This wasn't a standard unit, it was a suicide club for men small enough to fit into a hole 18 inches wide. The job description was insanity. Crawl into pitch-black darkness, armed only with a flashlight and a .45 caliber pistol to hunt an enemy who knew every inch of the dirt. The human cost was horrific. The tunnels were booby-trapped with primitive but lethal efficiency. A tripwire didn't set off a claymore, it released a box of scorpions or a viper bamboo pit. There were punji sticks coated in feces to ensure infection. The psychological toll on the tunnel rats was catastrophic. They weren't just fighting soldiers, they were fighting claustrophobia, asphyxiation, and the constant terror of being buried alive. The U.S. military was trading the sanity and lives of its specialized troops to clear a few meters of dirt that the enemy would simply reoccupy the moment the Americans left. It was a meat grinder fed by the stubborn refusal of command to admit that technology had hit a wall. When sending men to die proved too slow, the brain trust back in Washington threw everything from the chemistry lab at the problem. The result was a series of expensive, comical, and lethal failures.
First came the dogs. German shepherds were sent down to sniff out the VC. The Viet Cong simply washed the tunnel entrances with American soap or used uniforms taken from dead GIs to confuse the dogs. Then they rigged the lower levels with pepper spray traps that destroyed the dogs' nasal passages. Then came the Mighty Mite. This was a commercial-grade blower unit modified to pump CS tear gas into the tunnels at high pressure. The theory? Smoke them out like rats. The reality? The water traps and blast doors sealed the gas into isolated pockets. The gas often backfired, drifting up through hidden vents and choking the U.S. troops on the surface. They tried flooding the tunnels with river water, but the clay soil absorbed it, or the drainage systems diverted it. Every technological fix the U.S. attempted was countered by simple physics and peasant ingenuity. We spent millions on chemical agents and industrial machinery, and they defeated it with a bucket of water and a wooden door. The ultimate humiliation was the battle of detection. The U.S. introduced sniffer missions, helicopters equipped with ammonia sensors to detect human urine and thermal imagers to detect campfires. It was high-tech hunting. The Vietnamese response was the Hoang Cam stove. It was an engineering marvel of thermodynamics. The stove channeled smoke through a series of underground chambers, cooling it down and diffusing it slowly through multiple outlets along the ground. By the time the exhaust hit the surface, it was invisible to the naked eye and too cold for thermal sensors to pick up. While U.S. pilots were staring at multi-million-dollar consoles looking for a heat signature, the enemy was cooking rice right under their noses. The contrast was stark. The U.S. relied on the electromagnetic spectrum. The Viet Cong relied on the laws of thermodynamics. In the jungle of Cu Chi, thermodynamics won every time.
If you want to see how a superpower burns money, look at Operation Cedar Falls in 1967. This was the largest ground operation of the Vietnam War. The objective? To erase the Iron Triangle, the stronghold covering the Cu Chi tunnels, from the face of the earth. The U.S. Army deployed 30,000 troops. They brought in hundreds of tanks and armored personnel carriers. But the real cost was in the logistical tail. To support this massive force for just 19 days, the U.S. Air Force flew thousands of sorties. They didn't just bomb the jungle, they tried to delete it. They used roam plows, massive armored bulldozers that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars each, to scrape the vegetation down to the red dirt. They burned what was left. The operation cost the American taxpayer the equivalent of a small nation's GDP. And the result? They captured some rice, destroyed some documents, and collapsed a few hundred meters of tunnel. Within weeks of the Americans leaving, the Viet Cong moved back in. We paid $1 billion to rent the land for a month. While the soldiers were sweating in the mud, the real winners of the tunnel war were sitting in air-conditioned boardrooms in Michigan and Missouri. The inability to find the tunnels led to a scorched earth policy that was a gold rush for chemical contractors. Since the tunnels were hidden by the jungle, the solution was to kill the jungle. Enter Agent Orange, Agent Blue, and Agent White. The U.S. government purchased these herbicides in quantities that defy logic, nearly 20 million gallons. The contracts for these chemicals were cost-plus, meaning the more they sprayed, the more the manufacturers made. It was the ultimate capitalist feedback loop. The enemy hides, so we buy chemicals to reveal them. The chemicals failed to reveal the deep tunnels, so we buy more chemicals. Companies like Dow Chemical and Monsanto saw their stock prices tethered to the persistence of the Viet Cong. We were literally poisoning the asset, the land of South Vietnam that we were supposedly there to save, all while the tunnel dwellers simply closed their airtight trap doors and waited for the mist to settle. In the corporate world, when a project fails, you cancel it. In the military, you just change the metrics. Since the U.S. couldn't measure success by tunnels destroyed or land held, they invented a new key performance indicator: the body count. This was the McNamara fallacy in action. The Pentagon demanded numbers to justify the budget, so the system incentivized fraud. If a tunnel was bombed and collapsed, commanders would estimate how many enemy soldiers should have been inside and report that as a confirmed kill. We were spending millions on B-52 arc light strikes based on data that was completely fabricated. A single B-52 sortie cost roughly $30,000 in 1960s money. They were dropping 30 tons of high explosives on coordinates where a sensor thought a tunnel entrance might be. Often they were just bombing empty dirt, but on the balance sheet, every bomb dropped was logged as a necessary expense for area denial. We were effectively strip mining Vietnam with TNT, and the only thing we were extracting was debt. Let's look at the kill-cost ratio, the darkest statistic of the war. By 1968, military analysts estimated it cost the U.S. roughly $400,000 to kill one Viet Cong fighter. Now look at the other side of the balance sheet. What was the cost of the Cu Chi tunnels? The labor was free, conscripted peasants and volunteers. The tools were hand spades, often made from scrap metal scavenged from American trash heaps. The structural supports were bamboo, harvested from the forest. The enemy's budget was effectively zero. The U.S. was fighting a financial war against an opponent that didn't use currency. We were firing million-dollar missiles at 10-cent targets. It's the definition of financial asymmetry. Every time a U.S. helicopter took off to hunt for a tunnel entrance, we lost money. Every time the Viet Cong dug another meter of tunnel, they effectively devalued the American dollar. The tunnels weren't just a bunker, they were a mechanism to bleed the U.S. Treasury dry, one shovel of dirt at a time. The final exam for the Cu Chi tunnels was on January 30th, 1968. For years, General Westmoreland had been telling the American public that there was light at the end of the tunnel. He didn't realize the light was an oncoming train. During the Tet New Year truce, the tunnels stopped being a hiding place and became a highway. Thousands of Viet Cong troops, weapons, and supplies moved silently beneath the feet of the U.S. Army, bypassing the defensive rings around Saigon. When the signal was given, they didn't attack from the jungle, they surged up from the sewers and basements right in the heart of the capital.
The most shocking image of the war, guerrillas storming the U.S. Embassy compound, was made possible by the Cu Chi network. The tunnels allowed a peasant army to achieve total strategic surprise against the world's most advanced surveillance state. It proved that despite the billions spent on sensors, defoamiants, and bombs, the U.S. intelligence apparatus was effectively blind. We owned the sky, but we had lost the ground long ago. Today, the irony of Cu Chi is palpable. The tunnels that once frustrated the might of the U.S. military are now one of Vietnam's most profitable tourist attractions. The very site where American GIs died fighting claustrophobia and booby traps has been turned into a war theme park. But there is a subtle insult in the architecture. The tunnels open to tourists today have been widened, dug out to accommodate the larger frames of Western visitors. The original tunnels were so tight they were a weapon in themselves. Geopolitically, Cu Chi changed the doctrine of modern warfare. It taught the world that you don't need an air force to fight a superpower, you just need a shovel and the will to endure. We see the legacy of Cu Chi in the caves of Tora Bora in Afghanistan and the tunnel networks of Gaza. The blueprint for defeating American air superiority was written in the clay of Vietnam, and every insurgent group since has studied it religiously. The failure at Cu Chi is the ultimate case study in the technological trap. The United States believed that engineering problems have engineering solutions. If the enemy digs, we make a bigger bomb. If the enemy hides, we make a better sensor. But war is not an engineering problem. It is a human contest of wills. The U.S. focused on the hardware of the tunnels, the dirt, the depth, the ventilation. We ignored the software, the people inside them. The people of Cu Chi lived in darkness for years, performed surgeries without anesthetic, and raised children underground while the world above them burned. No amount of money, no amount of R&D, and no weapons system in the Pentagon's inventory can calculate the value of human endurance. The lesson is simple. You cannot bomb an idea, and you cannot defeat an enemy who is willing to become the Earth itself. In the end, the United States left Vietnam. The helicopters took off from the embassy roof, the last checks were written, and the deficit was passed on to the taxpayer. And when the dust settled, the people of Cu Chi emerged from the ground. They didn't have radar, they didn't have B-52s, they didn't have $1 trillion budget. They had a network of holes in the ground that cost nothing but sweat and blood. The city beneath the bombs stands as a permanent monument to the limits of military power. It is the receipt for the most expensive lesson in American history. Gravity works, bombs fall, but the ground always wins. This is the Shadow Broker. If you want to know where the bodies are buried and where the money actually went, hit that subscribe button for Julian Arsenal. The official narrative is written by the victors, but the real data is written in the red ink. I'll see you in the next investigation.